Look, you've seen it before. The US invades, the US withdraws. I mean, remember Afghanistan? That war was an absolute disaster. But it was a jackpot for US defense contractors. And now, with the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, they're making even more, despite having hardly any US troops on the ground.
War profiteers always win, regardless of the outcome.
Even though America's global influence is waning, its war machine keeps growing stronger and stronger.
Look what is written here. USA. These are the American weapons behind me.
In this video, we'll unpack how American defense giants helped build the modern military-industrial complex and why their model is so profitable, no matter how many lives are lost. The US hasn't won most of the wars it's fought since 1945. It keeps ending up in a stalemate or being defeated entirely, and yet one group always comes out ahead: the US defense industry. Given how much profit is on the line, US defense companies play a heavy hand in how these wars and their purpose are framed.
What we do saves lives. It protects peace and democracy throughout the world.
This couldn't be further from the truth. The United States government is the leading force of instability, violence, and environmental destruction.
Abby Martin is an investigative journalist and the creator of the Empire Files, an independent media outlet that dissects the inner workings of US empire. Her reporting engages with a hard truth. War is a business, and business is booming.
The military-industrial complex plays the center role in shaping American foreign policy. It is the shaper of US foreign policy.
And this business model works. In 2023, US defense companies made almost $1 trillion in sales, with a record $765 billion of that coming directly from government contracts. Here's one way that money ends up in their hands. When the US votes to send military aid abroad, like to Israel or Ukraine, most of that money goes to American arms makers. Whether it gets used to fund new weapons or restocking those sent from US reserves, it basically serves as a form of corporate welfare for defense contractors.
It fuels the conflicts. I mean, you look at Gaza and Ukraine. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all of their stocks exploded. Their profits were massive in 2023 and 2024. Why? Because of these horrific, catastrophic wars. Their shareholders had huge returns on those wars.
It's true. In the year following Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine, the stock price for General Dynamics rose nearly 34%. 1 year after the Hamas-led attacks on Israel, Lockheed Martin saw an increase of over 54%. And of course, the other top contractors benefited in their own ways too. These companies aren't just making money, they're becoming too powerful to stop. President Eisenhower famously predicted this problem back in the 1960s. In fact, he coined the term military-industrial complex during his final speech as president.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He was right. Today, just 5 US companies dominate the entire global defense industry: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics.
Well, the United States is the global arms supplier. The US supplies almost 50% of all the weapons on the planet. There is no other country that parallels the military power and entrenchment of this kind of military-industrial complex other than the US empire.
And that kind of dominance doesn't just mean influence. It means they profit from nearly every major conflict on Earth. And that's no accident, it's by design. Take NATO, for example. Back in the 1990s, US defense contractors lobbied hard to expand NATO, not just for security reasons, but also to open up new markets for their business. Whenever a new member state joined NATO, they were required to modernize their militaries, usually by buying American weapons. And it worked. Today, the US supplies about 2/3 of NATO's weapons. Just take Ukraine, for example. Since the war in Ukraine began, demand has surged. In 2024 alone, US military equipment sales to foreign governments has jumped 29%, hitting a record $319 billion.
The US military gives billions of dollars in military aid to countries like Egypt and Israel and Ukraine and Uganda, but it comes with conditions.
This so-called aid from the US government often requires countries to spend that money on US weapons, no matter who the aid is for. In fact, when US weapons are used in places like Gaza and the West Bank, it's usually the US government that's paying for them.
Seeing the Palestinians in Gaza scavenge and dig through the rubble and finding bombs that are made from Raytheon and Boeing.
بنطلع هنا ولا بنطلع هنا أي مكان بصير فينا خطر يقصفوا هان يقصفوا هان إحنا بنتأذى قتلوا طفولتنا.
الوقت إنه حياة خوف ورعب وذعر ندور على مكان آمن ناخذهم إله نفسيتهم صارت تتحمل أكتر من أعمارهم.
إحنا أحلامنا تدمرت فيش فينا حال خلاص تعبنا.
It's sick. The blood is on our hands. I don't know how we can ever recover. I don't know how humanity can ever recover from what we've collectively allowed to happen in Gaza. And for people to say, oh, it's just far away, we have nothing to do with it, couldn't be further from the truth. It's a US-Israeli genocide. And it's pushed and propped up by US defense contractors. And they profit off every bullet and every bomb that's dropped on those babies.
And that pipeline of profit has been in place for decades. Since 1948, the US has sent over $300 billion in foreign aid to Israel, more than any other country. Most of that comes in the form of annual grants that Israel has to spend on American weapons. For example, Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system has been a goldmine for companies like Raytheon that produce its parts. And when tensions escalate again, Congress fast-tracks more funding to Israel, and the cycle continues. So this aid is basically a subsidy to American defense contractors. Israel's attacks on Gaza and the US backing that enables them are continuing with no real end in sight. And that means an open-ended stream of profit for the US corporations that are supplying the Israeli military. And this isn't a one-off. Gaza is just the latest example. Since 2001, the US has spent $14 trillion on war. Nearly half of that went to private defense contractors. During this period of time, Afghanistan became the longest war in US history and a business model of endless profit for the defense industry.
ناتو قواو امریکایي سرتیرو په خلکو باندې بمبار کړی د خلک وژلي دي په شهادت رسولي دي همدا به جریان کې امپاکت دو نفر زخمی شهید شدن این عمل از طرف امریکا انجام شده.
But to really understand how these 5 defense companies ended up with all of the leverage, we have to go back to the 1990s.
2 years ago, I began planning cuts in military spending that reflected the changes of the new era. But now, this year, with imperial communism gone, that process can be accelerated.
When the Cold War was ending, the US government expected its defense budget to shrink. It decided to encourage the 51 existing defense contractors to merge, signaling that only a handful of firms would survive the new era. So in 1993, the Pentagon invited top defense executives to a dinner that would later be dubbed as the Last Supper. What followed was a wave of mergers that gave rise to today's Big Five. But that consolidation came at a cost. With so few players left in the game, these companies now wield immense power.
The military-industrial complex doesn't care about winning wars. The US doesn't care about winning the Afghanistan war. They just wanted to keep it going.
And they got what they wanted. Even after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the defense budget didn't shrink. In fact, it's grown nearly 14% in the 3 years after the war ended.
It's because the defense contractors always win. There always needs to be another threat on the horizon. Communism, terrorism, environmentalism, China. There always has to be a threat to justify these mass expenditures. And now we're looking at a $1 trillion budget.
Today, the US spends more on defense than the next 9 countries combined. And every year, the US defense budget expands with very little public scrutiny. Despite this massive price tag, the Defense Department has actually failed its financial audit 7 years in a row. That means it hasn't even been able to prove how most of its funds were used. But the defense budget is just the tip of the iceberg.
In fact, these weapons contractors spend so much money and employ hundreds of lobbyists, 700 or more per year. That's more than 1 lobbyist per every member of Congress. But it's not just that.
In fact, 80% of expert witnesses who testify to Congress are actually paid by arms makers to lobby on their behalf.
All of this is a joke. It's all a show. So We, the taxpayers, subsidize the defense industry. The defense industry hires lobbyists to go and perform on the Hill and pretend like they're independent experts. And really, it's all just a big game, isn't it? And the joke's on us.
They lobby Congress to keep wars going. And then some of them even help run these wars from inside the Pentagon itself.
There's a program inside the military where hundreds of military officers with very elite positions actually go into defense contractor businesses and get internships. They sit there for months, sometimes more than a year, as active duty government employees. Then they go back to the government while still in active duty military positions. It's a direct pipeline from the government to the MIC.
Not to mention, former high-level military officials who retire often go on and serve on the boards of the Big Five. So yeah, the line between the US military and for-profit defense companies is becoming blurrier every day. But the real cost comes to those who live where the bombs fall.
It is on our shoulders. We are the children of the empire, and this is our government. We are the only ones who can stop this.
It turns out Eisenhower's warning was all too real. Only an alert and knowledgeable population can counter the military-industrial complex's power to shape US policy.
I truly believe that the more of us wake up with an internationalist perspective, where we can have solidarity for our brothers and sisters no matter where they live, no matter what geographical barriers that they're imposed by, we will be unstoppable.